Ladies and gentlemen, Alisée de Tonnac.
This is beautiful Switzerland, post-Leichhardt Switzerland. And I was talking with some of the entrepreneurs. What shocked us the most is when we walk in the streets of Lausanne, how much space we have between ourselves and the next person in front. Now let me tell you a bit about another reality. That of Nigeria. This is the city of Lagos, 20 million people. This is another chaotic reality. And at Seedstars, we ask ourselves, what about impacting this person's life or this person's life? And how can we do that? The mission at Seedstars is impacting people's lives in emerging markets. And we believe in two things, entrepreneurship and technology to do that. Now let's look more closely, what does it mean to impact people's lives? If we want to use one indicator, we can think of the GDP per capita. And it's very interesting to see that between emerging frontier markets versus North America and Europe, there is a big gap. That, we see it as opportunity. But can we concretely close that gap? Can we concretely make an impact? Because in some ways, GDP per capita means satisfaction of life and also linked to life expectancy. Looking even closer, if we look at the difference between South Korea and Nigeria, it's even more shocking. Back in 1965, there was a difference of only twofold. Today, South Korea's GDP has grown by 22. Why? What happened? What was the differentiator? So there are many reasons, many arguments, and I won't go into all of them. But let's look at two major forces, which is the public sector and the private sector, and how they helped to grow the economy. And what we see, I'm sorry, this is the first time I use a lot of graphics, is that in terms of education, when you invest in education, there's a clear correlation with regards to the GDP per capita. Also, what they did in South Korea is that they decided to focus on one niche market, and focus on high value-added jobs, and to build kind of an expertise and first-mover advantage on the global landscape. And what they chose at that time was electronics. So everyone owns or knows about Samsung. For every dollar spent in education, $10 to $15 is generated in economic growth. Another fact that I would like to discuss with you is we talk a lot about how can we reduce unemployment in emerging markets, and this is absolutely a reality. But what's interesting to also understand is the unstable jobs. And it's the government's position to try and balance between unstable jobs, which usually are linked to more labor-intensive types of jobs, versus higher value-added niche jobs. And this also is a real problem. How do we get that portion of instability to stability? Here you have an example of Africa. So, private sector, that's us. How can you and me, we work on this together? How can we impact and make a difference in terms of the GDP per capita? What we see is that over the next decade, more than 1 billion young people will enter the global market, and that 90% of the new jobs are created by the private sector. So how can we make a difference? We think it's through entrepreneurship. In the US, the sector that created the most jobs, the life cycle of companies that created the most jobs were those between 0 and 5 years old. This concretely are all SMEs and startups. But again here, what we scout from around the world, and the types of finalists you will see tonight, is those high impact-driven companies. This is what we're trying to scout for, because they actually create the most jobs. According to a research from Nesta, 6% of the firms generated over 50% of the new jobs and GDP growth. Only 6%. So the kind of strategy of spray and pray doesn't necessarily work, because we're talking about 6% that have impact. And on the other side, these 6%, what was one of their key differentiator? Technology. We're living in a moment where technology is allowing us to have, allowing consumers to have access to absolutely new solutions that elevate their social standards. Remember that it took us 100 years to get to 1 billion consumers when we are talking about the telephone. And it took us less than 10 years when talking about smartphones. 1 billion consumers. And the adoption rate is getting faster and faster for every new technology step. So, looking back at those 1 billion people that are going to come on the job market, added to that, 60% will be working in jobs that don't exist. And in Europe, many times we focus on how are we going to manage the job loss due to a disruption in an industry. But in emerging markets, we're starting from the start. When you look at e-commerce, for example, there are 90,000 people per retail outlet in the APAC region versus 1,200 people per retail outlet in the US. What's the next trend? It's not going to be in increasing the number of retail outlets, but increasing the number of e-commerces. And hence you have a whole disruption in consumer behavior and solutions that can be added around this industry. So we have concrete examples of startups that Seedstars has sourced, has scouted, finalists from last year that have been disrupting and creating this impact on their regions. Scanded from India, for example, simple solution, in one click you can compare all the prices online. We have more solutions related to these regions. The reality is there are still 4 billion people without addresses. Myself spending half of my time in Lagos, Nigeria, there is no third Orchard Street. It gets very complicated to get from point A to B. And so with technology and geolocalization, OK High from Kenya is able to provide an address book for everyone. We have Totus Power, an entrepreneur from Chile, one of our winners from 2013. And what he has understood is that he uses the batteries of electric cars and at their end life in Europe and reuses them in Kenya and India in schools to generate power for these schools. We also have M-Kopa Solar, which is bringing light to homes in Kenya and Tanzania. And their objective is to sell an affordable solar kit for families, and has a very interesting payment solution where they pay upfront more or less $35, which is the price of a telephone in Kenya. And then they reimburse every day through M-Pesa, a mobile payment solution where you use airtime to pay until they finally have full ownership of their own solar kits. When we look at the agriculture industry, we also have technology disrupting, such as Kilimo from West Africa, that is allowed to give in real-time information on the prices of the different products on the market, weather conditions. We have e-fishery in the aquaculture that is also a smart feeding system for fishes that is directly linked to your phone and gives you the information simply by SMS. Or we even have drones flying over Costa Rica, helping farmers to optimize their crop management. In terms of education, not necessarily very fancy innovations, but we're seeing in terms of breadth and consumer adoption, we have a lot of crowdfunding to help local talent to be able to access world-class education. We have Brick from Kenya and going over sub-Saharan Africa, that in a box you have a digital classroom available for students in the most remote areas. We have Bcash from Bangladesh in the financial sector, that is the equivalent of M-Pesa in Kenya and has been able to spread to a wide variety of consumers. In terms of also credit scoring, the lending industry and how it's being transformed thanks to technology and these entrepreneurs, we're also seeing that only with mobile data, we're able to better manage the credit worthiness of people that would have never had the opportunity to receive a loan. or drones flying over, and I'm pretty sure they'll be flying over Eastern Europe, Africa, Asia before Europe and the US. It's interesting to see that the Rwandese government right now is modifying its aerial regulations because they want to have drones flying over for cargo reasons in the city of Kigali. You see, I wonder if in these markets, innovation is going to go much faster simply because the foundation of a blank sheet of paper where you can start from will support the next technologies to come. Seedstars is an organization in 55 countries, and our objective is to support these driven entrepreneurs. If we know one thing, is that never doubt that a small group of committed people can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that has ever happened. So these 54 entrepreneurs that we have spent the last 3 days with, these are, as I mentioned before, the 6%. Thank you very much.
Stay with me, just 1 sec, because I want everybody to know what we've been doing during the past 3 days. Because, well, today it's fun, but what's been happening during the past 3 days with the startups, with the mentors?
Yeah, absolutely. So for the past, everyone thinks the day started today, but actually we haven't been sleeping for a week. So all the startups came in Saturday and Sunday, and we had an intensive 2-day bootcamp with 40 mentors, advisors from around the world that came in and digged in their business model. I saw several companies that pivoted in the night to make the business model more interesting. And then Wednesday, we tested out for the first time an investor forum in which all startups had the opportunity to pitch in the morning, and in the afternoon organized a total of 280 investor meetings so that they would have an opportunity to discuss with investors.
Well, thank you very much, Alisée.
Thank you, Alex.
All right, now.